energy, more energy, more energy. Hi, my name is Ark Ramsay. I'm an artist and writer from Barbados. I work primarily with fiction and nonfiction storytelling. What I do is I try to imagine worlds and possibilities where queer people get to imagine and live their lives in a space where their island loves them back. My work tries to pull together a lot of different things. I recently have been very interested in environmental humanities, so I bring a lot more of the environment and what's happening with the environment into my work. But when I think about that question, the most significant work that I've been doing recently, I think about the novel that I finished last year, that I am now putting through the paces of trying to edit and bring into its full completion. And that book is really personal to me. The story really is about this island teenager who would rather run straight into a hurricane rather than admit to their queerness. And when I worked on that book, I found myself sort of facing the question of what does it mean to write queer life and write queer pain and also write queer joy. Because when I wrote the first draft of that book, a friend of mine who read it said, there is no space in here for any kind of joy. All of these characters, all these scenarios, everything you've put on the page is pain. And so writing that book, writing through that book was extremely significant for me. But it still, when I think about it, is not the most important work that I've done so far. I think that title belongs to an essay that I wrote a couple of years ago and that I published very recently. And it's a conversation between the story my family traveled on, really. It's a conversation between choices made by my great-great-grandfather and the non-immigrant application for an American visa. I was thinking a lot, and I've been obsessed with for my entire life, why I ended up in Barbados, of all places. And my great-great-grandfather migrated to Trinidad, an island close to Barbados, instead of choosing America. That was where he was supposed to go. And so this inevitability, I played with that in this essay. I thought about, why do I feel so unlike other people in my family? What would my life have been if I had ended up in America and not in Barbados? And in this essay, I really tried to break that open, and I tried to imagine what it would have been to have traveled all of the way. And I wanted to also think about people in my family who were more like me. I wanted to imagine stories that I had no access to anymore because these family members are long dead. And so in this way, these two books, these two stories, they circled these questions of what does it mean to be a queer person living and trying to thrive in a place like Barbados. I think that there is a really fundamental difference between identity in America and identity in Barbados. American identity politics has influenced the island, but there is a real sense of what does it mean to be an islander? And when I think about that question, I think about what does it mean to be a queer islander? And in Barbados, we have our own issues, but we also have our own successes and our own joys. And we have our own groups and movements that are trying to figure out what it means to live a life in Barbados, like a full manifested queer life where you can have protections from the state, but also you just get to flourish and you get to make your way without having to think about a life that's on the run, a life that you have to move from place to place just to express yourself or to be yourself. And maybe this is a few years off, maybe it's a few decades off, but I believe in it, and I personally try to concentrate and offer my energies towards that cause as well. I want to sit here and say that it is possible and easy to express that in Barbados, but I know in my heart that isn't actually true. I'm non-binary. I've been openly queer for almost a decade now, and I've had to leave Barbados to figure out what that meant and what it could look like, and to meet people who are similar to me. Barbados, for me growing up, carried a lot of profound loneliness. And meeting and interacting and falling in love with other queer people there in our small little community, which is a loving and small community, was profoundly healing for me. But the work of my 20s was the work of traveling and exploring and getting the privilege to do those things. And also it was a profound feeling that I couldn't really express myself or live the way I wanted to live in Barbados. But I'm entering into the work of my 30s now, and I do want to know what it looks like to recommit to the place that I love and the place that I was born to. Because there are people who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s who are living queer life in Barbados. It might not look like the queer life that people expect to see in movies or in San Francisco or in London, but it is a queer life, and it is just as valid and just as rich and just as powerful. I came to writing first and foremost as a way to sort of like, I think as we all do, we all have those like teenage frustrations, and a lot of artists turn to their work as a way to kind of expunge those demons or expel them. And so that was how I approached writing in my late teens, in my early 20s. But as I came to understand it as a craft and a discipline and something that I wedded myself to, it's the longest lasting relationship of my life, I came to understand it as more than just something for getting rid of what was bad. It became a place to also play and to think through what it could look like when things were good, and what it could look like when parts of the world that were configured in a way that denied access or denied hospitality to queer people, what it could look like if maybe those parts were restructured. And coming into writing nonfiction as well, exposing myself and my story and my family story through essays and through memoir writing, that kind of, taking off the veil of that and revealing so much of myself, that was another way of experiencing writing as well. Because now writing is a way for people to know not just the fictional worlds that I create, but the actual life that I've experienced. And something that's been turning in my head for the last couple of years, about 5 years ago, I was in Suzhou in China, and I was at an art exhibit. And the exhibit itself was beautiful, but the artist's statement stuck with me a lot. The artist, basically, they were talking about what they thought art was. And they wrote that art was a response to pain in the same way that incense or a pearl is a response to frustration and pain. And I refused to accept that when I read it, because I don't think that I want to approach art like that anymore. I did when I was younger. I want art to be, and I want writing to be something more than that. I want writing to have a more profound way of influencing not only my life, but the lives of those around me. And maybe that sounds a little mystical and a little bit far-reaching, but I do believe that there is something very profound in the craft, and very healing. I think writing can be therapeutic, and it is therapeutic. I know a lot of people who talk about writing as their first experience with coming to terms with themselves, journaling, keeping records of your life, being able to imagine scenarios that didn't go the way that maybe you wanted them to go. But I think too, as like a queer writer and a trans writer, I have been grappling with this idea of putting my pain onto the page in its rawest form, because I think that there is this commodification of pain and the commodification of queer pain, especially when you look at a lot of the books that have been published in the last 10 years about queerness. Yes, there's pain on those pages, and part of me sometimes wonders how those writers feel about that pain now, because that's a very much the larger market wants queer suffering, as horrible and depressing as that sounds. Like, it is marketable. It is marketable to see people suffer. It is marketable to have their exposed wounds. And part of me wants to really pay attention to that thought as I approach writing, because I do feel I have a fundamental responsibility to not fall into that, or fall into that completely. There's no way to not put hurt onto the page, because hurt is real and writing is real. But there has to be space too for trans liberation, trans beauty, trans joy, queer mundanity, queer boringness. You know, the lives that we live are not just explorations of the worst days of them. I think of creativity as this cumulative force. So I'll talk to somebody, I'll hear the thread of a song, I'll read a line of poetry, and it's building. It's like this, it's the feeling of the air when a Category 1 hurricane is building, you know, when the air is supercharged and it's growing and it's growing and it's growing. But you don't get to choose when to use that. So things that inspire me today, I know in my heart will be useful to the work in 5 years. And so it's this sort of building, it's an unstoppable building, and writing is almost the only way for me to release that, to stop it from just blowing my brains up. And so yeah, I think of creativity like that, but I'm also inspired by nature, by the ocean, by the landscape that I grew up with and in and connected to and kinned to. So when I am truly lost, I go to, my family has a small little house at the very edge of Barbados, and it's this spot in particular that puts me back together. And when I go there, I know that everything that's been building and kind of bubbling up to the surface will be ready. And it will be in this moment that, oh, now I know what it is. I touch pen to paper, it's ready. I think about this short story that I wrote when I was 19. It was about some friends of mine, and I didn't know what to do with that story, and so I put a car crash into it. I had never experienced a car crash before, but I was very young. But I put this very destructive car crash into the story, and for 10 years the story didn't work. I threw everything at it. Every couple of years I would come back to it. And then when I was studying here at Fudan, I learned about Tibetan Buddhism. And just a small fragment of that knowledge, just one little symbolic thing from that enormous corpus of knowledge, I slid it into the story, and the story worked, and now it's published and it's in the world. But that inspiration, it took so long to find its completion. So I don't really think about being inspired by love or philosophy, or I think it's really just everything. And it's the small things that you don't even notice that come back in such a profound way. I'm torn because when I think about that, I get really nervous, because there's a history of writers and artists who talk about their own sort of separation from life, and how life is this thing on the outside and the work is over here, and they are, like Dylan Thomas, the apocryphal story of him drawing a big O on his page and saying, well, I've written for the day, so now I can go and drink. The sense that the work is only for filling the void within an unsatisfactory life. And I've been thinking a lot over the last couple of years about what does it actually mean to build a life alongside the work, to not allow it to be this consuming thing that only pulls from darkness and misery and only contributes darkness and misery, but this companion, something you live with, something you work with, something you love with. I won't pretend that getting published or the prizes and all of that it's not important, because at the end of the day, it feels really good to have other people validate your work. But I remember this video that I saw of Doris Lessing in, I think it was 1986 or so. She had just won a Booker, and the cameraman is trying to get in her face, and she's, an older woman walking home with her groceries, and she's trying to ask him what's going on, and he says, "You just won the Booker," and she says, "Oh Christ, another one of those, okay." And it's this sense, I see in that moment, maybe there's more to it, but I see in that moment someone who thinks, I want a prize, okay, I'm going back to the work anyway. Because even, I'm assuming, I might get there, I might not, even a Nobel Prize in literature is just one day in your life, The high of winning, the high of publication, yeah, these are great. You hold on to it, you celebrate it, you tell your friends, you tell your family, you read yourself in print, but then that passes. And what's left after that, right? So I think the relationship you create with the work that you do becomes the relationship you have to the life that you live. So it's more fundamental to think about the work beyond the outcome of the work. And it's something that I've been struggling with a lot recently, because I want my book to sell. I want my short stories to sell. I want my essays to be picked up by these magazines. But at the end of the day, I still sit down and I pull together and I do the work. And when the rejections roll in, it's the work that protects me from that. It's the work that says, okay, I understand that you feel really shitty right now because, Guernica didn't want your essay, but you continue the process of trying to write another one. And you continue the process of maybe editing the essay and learning from the rejection and growing. But if you fixate purely on how to be somebody who reaches those prizes and how to be somebody who lands up in these kinds of magazines or these kinds of publications, you lose yourself. You become a factory creator of art. You don't become somebody who creates original or gut-touching work. Study AI, be an accountant. No, I think that writing is a very powerful thing. It can be healing, it can be helpful, it can help you make sense of the world. And at the end of the day, writing is also yours. You carry it with you to bed, you wake up with it in the morning. It's not something that somebody can, you don't lose your job writing. You might not publish the book, you might not publish the poem, you might not publish the story, but it's yours. It's this thing that you grow with and that you grow alongside. There's no accountant that I know of who is like, I can't wait to go home and do more accounts. Many writers I know think, okay, I can't go to the pub because I have to finish the story. And it's that connection that's very important. And so when I think about what advice you give to somebody who wants to get involved in this lifelong connection with writing, it's the same advice that I was given, which is read widely, immerse yourself in the world so that you can build and grow experiences, and write what you know. These are all the basics, and these are all great pieces of advice, but the one that I think I wished I had heard when I was younger was find out how to play with writing and then try and learn how to keep that connection to play. Because so often it becomes this sort of monstrous thing, you get lost in the, I need to make this in this way so that it's publishable, so that people will read it, so that I'll be known, and all these things accumulate and they get like phantoms that kind of hover around you. But this is, at the end of the day, it's a beautiful, creative exploration and it's play. And if you can figure out how to hold on to that, you will go very, very, very far. Not just in writing, but in life and in happiness.